All right, we're diving deep into Alfred Korzybski's Science and Sanity.
Oh, an excellent choice.
Specifically, we'll be focusing on the preface and the context surrounding it, trying to really grasp what Korzybski wanted to get across about his work right from the start.
Yeah, that preface is really something.
Now, for anyone who's not familiar, Science and Sanity is considered an introduction to non-Aristotelian systems and general semantics.
Which can sound a bit intimidating, I know.
It can, but we're going to unpack it all together.
Right, make it nice and accessible.
Exactly.
You know, one thing that always strikes me is even before you even open the book, the cover itself practically shouts Korzybski's message.
It does.
And it was a message that felt so urgent back then, and somehow it still resonates today, you know?
It's true. The quotes he chose, pulled from his previous work, Manhood of Humanity, and his own introductions, they all hammer in this idea that the old ways of thinking, well, they're just not cutting it.
Yeah, they're not enough anymore.
He even goes so far as to say that a shift away from those old ways, what he calls Aristotelian, is inevitable.
Inevitable. Wow. Strong words.
Strong words. And it's fascinating to consider the historical backdrop here.
Oh, absolutely. The context is crucial.
This book hit the scene in 1933.
Right on the heels of the Great Depression.
Exactly. And with the world teetering on the edge of another war, it makes you realize just how deeply these circumstances likely fueled Korzybski's sense of urgency.
No doubt about it. It was a time of immense upheaval.
And he genuinely believed that these inadequate evaluations, this clinging to Aristotelian thinking, was a major contributor to the world's problems.
To the insanity of the race, as he put it.
Exactly. The unsanity of the race. You can definitely sense the weight of those times in his words. And it makes you wonder if a non-Aristotelian shift was inevitable back then. Where do we stand now?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? But before we get too far ahead of ourselves,
Right.
let's zoom in on Korzybski himself for a moment.
Yeah, good idea.
I mean, his background adds another layer of intrigue to all of this.
Absolutely. Coming from a family of mathematicians and engineers.
And then serving in World War I.
Those experiences, they clearly shaped his approach.
Oh, without a doubt.
It's like he wasn't just theorizing in some ivory tower, you know?
Right.
He was searching for tangible solutions, practical tools to grapple with these massive challenges facing humanity.
Exactly. I mean, this wasn't just some abstract philosophical exercise for him.
Right.
And to be fair, Science and Sanity wasn't his first rodeo, so to speak.
It wasn't.
No. It followed his earlier work, Manhood of Humanity, where he introduced this really interesting concept of time binding.
Time binding. I'm intrigued already.
But in Science and Sanity, he's taking it a step further. He's really trying to build an entire system around these ideas.
So let's dig into this system, General Semantics.
All right, let's do it.
Now, Korzybski is very upfront about what it is not.
Right.
It's not just another branch of philosophy.
Or psychology.
Exactly. He calls it a new extensional discipline. And honestly, that label alone raises a lot of questions.
It definitely does. It piques your curiosity, doesn't it?
It really does. And then he goes on to emphasize that general semantics is all about training our nervous systems for more effective use.
Which, I mean, it sounds almost revolutionary when you think about it.
It does sound pretty radical, but how do we even begin to do that? What does that look like in practice?
Right. What does that even mean?
And then he claims that this system, this training, can be applied to a whole range of fields: medicine, education, even something as personal as relationships.
He really saw its potential everywhere. I mean, it's pretty bold, isn't it?
It is bold. And that's where the title Science and Sanity really comes into play, I think.
Oh, for sure. The title is so key.
He's essentially arguing that applying scientific thinking and methods to human behavior can lead us toward greater sanity, both individually and collectively.
Yeah, that's a powerful idea.
So he's basically saying our thinking processes, the way we use language, all of that directly impacts our well-being and even the state of the world around us. That's a pretty bold statement.
It is bold. And if you flip to the dedication page, you'll find another clue about Korzybski's approach.
Okay, the dedication page.
He dedicates the book to a really diverse lineup of thinkers, from Aristotle to Einstein.
Wow, quite the range.
Mathematicians, physicists, psychologists. He's drawing inspiration from all these different fields.
It's like he's demonstrating how interconnected knowledge truly is.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not trying to create something entirely new in a vacuum.
Right.
It's more about building upon and weaving together existing threads from all these different areas.
And to really solidify his commitment, he founded the Institute of General Semantics specifically to promote the study and application of these ideas.
So clearly this wasn't just some intellectual exercise for him. He was serious about putting this into practice.
Absolutely. He believed in the power of these ideas to make a real difference in the world. What strikes me is that Korzybski wasn't like just pointing fingers at the problem.
Yeah.
He was genuinely offering a solution, you know?
Right.
He saw general semantics as this path toward, well, toward greater sanity.
Oh, interesting.
Not a utopia, mind you,
Right.
but a way to navigate the world more effectively.
And more effectively, yeah.
And he makes that point explicitly, actually, on the book jacket, I think.
Oh, on the book jacket.
Yeah, he says, experience shows that when the methods of general semantics are applied, the results are usually beneficial.
Okay, so maybe not the most poetic language,
No,
but the message is clear.
it is. He's emphasizing that the system is meant to be practical, you know,
right.
something you can actually use in your life. And it's important to remember the context here. I mean, he was writing for an audience grappling with some truly immense challenges, right?
Yes, absolutely.
In the preface to the third edition, he talks about the gigantic task ahead to avoid tragedies stemming from unpredictability, insecurity, fears, anxieties, all of these things. And he traced all of those back to faulty evaluations,
Oh, wow.
to the way humans were using their nervous systems and language.
So in a sense, he's saying our own thinking is holding us back.
Yeah, in a way.
That our outdated ways of evaluating the world are actually contributing to what he calls unsanity.
Mm-hmm.
But if we can shift to a more scientific, what he calls a non-Aristotelian approach,
Yeah.
well, maybe there's hope.
Precisely. And he even goes so far as to say that this shift is inevitable, actually.
Inevitable.
The question, as he puts it, is when and at what cost. He's basically urging people to embrace this new way of thinking, to, consciously evolve our evaluations so we can create a better future.
You've mentioned the term non-Aristotelian a few times now. For those of us who might not be philosophy buffs, can you unpack what that actually means?
Of course. So when Korzybski talks about Aristotelian thinking, he's referring to a way of thinking that's based on, like, rigid categories and absolute truths.
Okay.
It's a system that, while useful for centuries, doesn't quite capture the fluidity and complexity of the world as we now understand it.
So it's like trying to fit square pegs into round holes.
Exactly. The categories just don't match up anymore.
Got it.
And that's where non-Aristotelian thinking comes in. It's a more flexible, dynamic approach that recognizes the limitations of language and the importance of context.
It sounds like a major mental shift.
It is.
But how does general semantics actually help us make that shift?
Well, remember, the core idea is to train our nervous systems for more efficient use.
Right.
And a big part of that is becoming aware of the structure of language
Okay.
and how it can influence our thinking. He emphasizes that the way we use words, the way we categorize and label things, can actually shape our perceptions and reactions.
So it's not about using proper grammar or anything like that.
Right, no.
It's more about understanding how language itself can trap us in old ways of thinking.
Precisely. Korzybski argued that by becoming more conscious of how language works, by recognizing its limitations and potential pitfalls, we can start to free ourselves from those traps and develop more accurate, more sane evaluations.
I'm starting to see how this connects back to his idea of time binding, which he explored in his earlier work. He saw humans as unique in our ability to accumulate knowledge over generations,
Yeah.
but also saw how our outdated evaluations could hinder this process.
That's a crucial point. He argued that if we want to truly fulfill our potential as time binders, if we want to build a saner, more peaceful world, we need to evolve our ways of evaluating.
Okay.
And that's where general semantics steps in.
But what does this evolution actually look like? Can you give us some concrete examples of how general semantics can be applied in different areas of life?
Absolutely. Let's take medicine, for instance.
Okay, medicine.
Korzybski pointed out that doctors often get stuck in, rigid diagnostic categories, which can lead to misdiagnosis and ineffective treatment. General semantics encourages them to consider each patient as a unique individual, to look beyond the labels and see the whole person.
That makes sense. So it's
Yeah.
about moving beyond those labels and seeing the nuances of each situation.
Exactly. And this applies to relationships as well.
Relationships.
Instead of labeling your partner with terms like lazy or inconsiderate, general semantics encourages you to, observe their behavior, consider the context, and communicate your needs clearly.
So it's about being more mindful, more precise in our language, and ultimately more understanding of ourselves and others.
You got it. And this awareness leads to those more accurate evaluations that Korzybski believed were key to greater sanity.
Okay, but let's be realistic. Changing the way we think and use language, that's a tall order.
It is.
Are there any specific techniques or tools within general semantics that can help us with this process?
Well, Korzybski actually provides a whole toolkit, which she calls extensional devices.
Extensional devices?
Yeah, these are mental techniques designed to make us more conscious of the potential pitfalls of language and help us stay grounded in the real world.
Okay, so what are some examples of extensional devices?
One of the simplest yet most powerful is indexing.
Indexing, okay.
It's about recognizing that no two things are exactly alike, even if we use the same word to describe them. For example, Apple 1 is not the same as Apple 2. They might share some similarities,
Right.
but they also have unique characteristics.
So it's about acknowledging the individuality of everything, even things we might lump together in our minds.
Exactly. Another important device is dating. This reminds us that things are constantly changing over time.
Oh, okay. Dating.
So John Smith in 2024 is not the same person as John Smith in 1994. Our language often fails to capture this, this dynamic nature of reality.
That makes a lot of sense. We often use labels and categories as if they're like fixed and permanent.
Right.
But the reality is that everything is in flux.
Precisely. And then there's the ever important, etc.
Et cetera, right.
Which reminds us that our knowledge is always incomplete. We can never know everything about anything, and there's always more to learn.
It's like he's urging us to be more humble,
Yeah.
more open to new information, more aware of the limitations of our own knowledge.
You're getting it. And that's a big part of what makes general semantics so fascinating, I think. It's not about finding the right answers.
Oh, interesting.
It's about developing a more flexible, more dynamic way of thinking that can adapt to new information and new challenges.
So it's not about dogma or rigid rules. It's about cultivating a mindset of like continuous learning and adaptation.
Exactly. And that's where the connection between science and sanity becomes even clearer. Korzybski is advocating for applying the scientific method, observation, experimentation, constant testing, and revision to our own thinking processes.
So it's about being willing to challenge our own assumptions, test our beliefs against reality, and be open to changing our minds when presented with new evidence.
You got it. He's basically saying that if we can bring that scientific spirit to the way we think and evaluate the world, then we have a much better chance of achieving greater sanity, both individually and collectively.
So it's about embracing uncertainty, recognizing that our knowledge is always evolving, and being willing to let go of outdated beliefs that no longer serve us.
And that's a pretty radical idea, even today. But if we can even begin to approach the world with that kind of open-mindedness, then maybe, just maybe, we can start to create a future that's a little bit saner, a little bit more in tune with the reality around us.
You know, it's interesting how Korzybski frames this whole issue.
Yeah.
He's not saying that Aristotelian thinking is inherently bad or wrong.
Right.
After all, it served humanity for centuries.
Yeah, for a long time.
But he argues that it's become outdated.
Like an old map.
Exactly like an old map that's no longer accurate.
That's a great analogy.
And he even argues that the very progress of modern science was possible because scientists dared to challenge those old fundamental assumptions, which is something that he points out is often prohibited in what he calls primitive sciences and dictatorships.
Right, where questioning the established dogma is, well, not exactly encouraged.
Exactly.
That's a great point, though.
Yeah.
He's not dismissing the value of Aristotelian thinking altogether.
Right.
It's more like we've outgrown it.
Yeah.
We need a new operating system for our brains to keep up with the complexities of the modern world.
It's like trying to navigate a bustling city with a map from the 1800s.
I love that analogy.
You might get somewhere eventually,
Maybe.
but it's going to be a lot more difficult and confusing than if you had an updated map.
Exactly. And actually, Korzybski even uses that map analogy himself.
That's he really?
Yeah. He says a map is not the territory.
Oh, right. Of course.
In other words, our language, our symbols, our mental models, these are just representations of reality, not reality itself.
Right.
And when we confuse the map with the territory, well, that's when we run into trouble.
It reminds me of that famous quote, "The word is not the thing."
Yes.
Exactly.
It's so easy to get caught up in the words themselves
Yeah.
and forget that they're just pointers, not the actual experience.
And that's a key principle of General Semantics, this idea of non-identity.
Non-identity.
It's this constant reminder that our maps, no matter how detailed or sophisticated, can never fully capture the complexity of the territory.
So it's about recognizing the inherent limitations of language.
Yes.
Understanding that our words are just abstractions,
Mhm.
just snapshots of a reality that's constantly in flux.
Precisely. And he goes even deeper,
Oh.
pointing out that many of the terms we use are what he calls multi-ordinal,
Multi-ordinal, okay.
meaning their meaning can shift depending on the context.
Oh, I see.
And failing to recognize this can lead to, endless misunderstandings and arguments.
That makes sense.
It's like when people argue about abstract concepts like freedom or justice.
Without defining what those terms mean to them, within a specific context, the
Yeah.
conversation just goes in circles.
Absolutely. It's like talking past each other.
Exactly. And to help us navigate this linguistic minefield,
Yeah.
Korzybski offers this whole toolkit of what he calls extensional devices.
Right. We talked about some of those earlier, like
Mhm.
indexing and dating.
Yeah.
But are there others that he highlights in the preface?
Well, he doesn't go into too much detail in the preface, but he does mention the importance of using quotes
Quotes. Okay.
around terms that we need to be especially careful with.
Oh, right.
Terms that are easily misinterpreted or loaded with assumptions.
Like a little warning sign,
Exactly.
reminding us to pause and consider the context before jumping to conclusions.
Exactly. And he also emphasizes the importance of recognizing the
Etc.
et cetera. The fact that our knowledge is always incomplete,
Mm-hmm.
that there's always more to the story than we can grasp at any given moment.
It's a call for humility.
Yeah.
For recognizing the limits of our own understanding.
And that humility, that willingness to acknowledge what we don't know, is essential for the scientific mindset that Korzybski is advocating for.
So General Semantics is not just about learning new terminology or memorizing techniques.
Yeah.
It's about cultivating a particular way of approaching the world,
Mhm.
a way that's grounded in observation,
Yes.
critical thinking, and a healthy skepticism toward our own assumptions.
Yes, precisely. And that's where the connection between science and sanity becomes so powerful.
Yeah.
He's not just talking about intellectual exercises here. He's
Yeah.
talking about a way of being in the world
A way of being, yeah.
that can lead to greater clarity, greater peace of mind,
Mhm.
and ultimately a greater capacity for creating a better future.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the preface of Science and Sanity, I'm struck by how relevant Korzybski's message feels even today.
I agree.
I mean, we're bombarded with information.
Oh, absolutely.
Misinformation, conflicting perspective.
It's overwhelming.
It can be. It's easy to get lost in the noise and lose sight of what's real.
It's true. But if we can take even a few of Korzybski's insights to heart,
Yeah.
if we can become more aware of how language shapes our thinking, more mindful of our own biases, and more willing to challenge our assumptions,
Right.
then maybe, just maybe, we can navigate this complex world with a bit more sanity and clarity.
So as Korzybski himself might say, the choice is ours.
It is.
We can cling to our outdated maps, or we can embrace a new way of seeing, a new way of being.
And in a world that often feels on the brink of chaos,
Yeah.
that choice might just make all the difference.